Several seconds later, the woman regained consciousness, opened her eyes, and while looking at the sky with a surprised expression, she began to wonder where she was and what was happening. She started to sit up with the help of one hand, placed the other on her head, and as she gradually regained consciousness, she began to wonder what kind of place this was. She remembered not having come here, while she had her hand on her head and slowly was trying to understand the situation. Jang approached her, sat down next to her, rested his elbows on his knees, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile, asked if she was awake. Upon hearing Jang's voice, she became alert and began to wonder who he was. Without wasting a second, she stood up and hopped away from him. She adopted an offensive stance, and while looking at Jang, she asked him who he was and also requested that he not approach her. He stood up, turned his body towards her, and with a calm voice, he asked her not to worry since he was just a job changer who had come to the desert to fight monsters. He also added that he hadn't come to harm her. Upon looking more closely, she remembered who Jang was. She placed a hand on her chest, began pointing at Jang with the other, and while staring at him intently, she told him that she knew he was the one who had attacked her before. Upon hearing this, Jang became somewhat nervous, closed his eyes, and with a smile apologized to her, explaining that he had mistaken her for a monster. Upon seeing that Jang was quite attractive, she couldn't help but blush. She turned her head towards him and asked how anyone could say that beautiful girls like her resembled monsters. She couldn't help but call him presumptuous. She entered into panic. Quickly she started touching her head and face to see if her nose and ears were still where they should be. Jang simply stayed silently observing her. He had used all his strength when he attacked her. Now, seeing that she still had so much vitality and was as if nothing happened, he began to wonder who she was and how she could withstand his attack. Several seconds later, after checking that she had no injuries, she calmed down. Then, she reached out to the side and the golden ring on her finger began to shine and emit a green energy. This ring was like a kind of clock which started projecting the time. Upon seeing the time, she realized that she had wasted too much time. She turned her back on Zhang and while walking away from him, decided to leave quickly before they caught her. While she was slowly moving away, Zhang simply remained silent. He began to stare at her intently and started wondering why she was running away and who were the people chasing her. The woman moved away from him a little, but suddenly stopped abruptly. She put her hand on her mouth and started biting her nails. Zhang didn't take long to realize that something was wrong. He approached the woman and seeing that she was very nervous, asked if there was any problem. As terror started to take hold of her, she slightly turned her head back, closed her eyes and forced a smile at him. She replied that there were some monsters ahead and since she wasn't very good at fighting, she decided to retreat and let Zhang deal with the monsters. In a matter of seconds, she stopped being nervous, turned her back to him again, waved goodbye and told him that this was it and decided to leave. Upon seeing this, Zhang's expression changed drastically. With a confused look, he started looking at the woman and thought that her acting skills were truly a pity. At that moment, it started to rain and the woman left. Zhang began walking around the area and thought that if there were monsters ahead, it was good because this was exactly what he wanted since these monsters were not opponents for him. Although they gave him devouring points, there was a problem. Zhang slightly turned his head to one side, and with a serious look, he thought that dealing with other job changers was going to be difficult. The desert had always been a lawless place where many people dedicated themselves to killing and stealing goods. He began to question whether it was a good idea to capture the woman from before, and while Zhang was lost in his thoughts, little Nine appeared. She started pointing ahead with her finger, and with a serious look she informed him that there were many monsters approaching from that side. Far from being scared or running away, Zhang was happy. He turned his head slightly towards her and upon hearing that there were many monsters, he told her that this was great. His happiness didn't last long. He turned his head to the side and upon seeing what was in front of him, he was shocked. In front of him, hundreds of giant spiders appeared, just like the ones he had just defeated. Among them was one even bigger than the rest, which started to look at him with a murderous gaze. As Zhang's body was surrounded by powerful energy, he began to look at the spiders and thought that this wasn't good for him. Fighting against some of them wouldn't be a problem, but now that there were so many spiders, he wouldn't be able to confront them, while little by little the giant spiders were getting closer to him. With a serious look, he began to stare at them fixedly, and thought that the woman was not lying. Despite being surrounded by monsters, he felt relieved. He preferred to fight against these monsters rather than against the job changers. The giant spiders became enraged, and with a murderous look, they gained momentum and began to advance quickly towards him. Upon seeing this, Zhang couldn't help but feel happy, as he had no reason not to want the devouring value that was approaching him. Zhang unsheathed the 2 daggers, and as his body emitted a powerful and suffocating energy, he began to stare fixedly at the monsters, giving Little Nine the command to activate the poisonous mist. She did not disobey the order and responded with a understood. At that moment, her poisonous mist began to emerge from the daggers he was holding. In the blink of an eye, the giant spiders approached him, opened their mouths and prepared to attack. While Zhang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he stood still for several seconds. One of the giant spiders tried to attack him, but Zhang moved at an incredible speed, and using the daggers and Little Nine's poisonous mist, he gained momentum and in the blink of an eye, pierced its body, splitting it in half and infecting it with the poisonous mist in the process. While he was in the air, he slightly turned his head back, and while staring fiercely at the monsters with a killer look, he thought this was strange because he didn't know why these monsters had become much faster than before. While Zhang was distracted, another giant spider gained momentum and began to advance towards him at a high speed. As it slowly approached him, it started staring at him with a murderous look and prepared to attack. Zhang didn't take long to feel the presence of the giant spider. Quickly, he slightly turned his head back, and upon seeing that it was trying to attack by surprise, he was somewhat surprised. But for the giant spider's bad luck, Zhang was not going to stand idly by. Just before it could make a move, in the blink of an eye, Zhang cut its body into pieces using the daggers. The pieces of its body fell to the ground, and several seconds later Zhang landed on the ground. While he was holding the 2 daggers with both hands, and his body was releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine. With a murderous look, he began to stare at its corpse and realized that this wasn't right. Although he had reacted in time to the attack, and had ended its life in the blink of an eye, he had received a small cut on his abdomen in the process. At that moment, the small spiders began to advance rapidly towards him, and he didn't take long to realize that these monsters were actually cooperating with each other. On closer inspection, Zhang saw a spider that was very different from the rest. This spider had 6 eyes and was much larger, so he quickly came to the conclusion that this spider was the boss. Upon seeing this, he began to question whether this boss was commanding the others. In the blink of an eye, thousands of spiders appeared and surrounded Zhang. While his body was releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist, he started staring at the boss, and instead of running away, he simply stood still. Zhang finally understood that the thousands of monsters living in this area had the same strategy, both in numbers and tactics, so it was not surprising that no one came here. With a serious look, Zhang began to stare at the boss and thought that the only way to defeat these small monsters was by killing the boss. Upon seeing the number of monsters present, he thought this was going to be a bit difficult. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine emerged through the poisonous mist and placed her hand on his shoulder, getting his attention. As she slowly manifested herself, with a serious look on her face, she began to stare directly at the boss and explained to Zhang that she was able to understand the situation. She revealed that these monsters were trying to challenge their master. Upon hearing this, Jiang became somewhat confused. He turned his head slightly towards her and asked what she was talking about. Little Nine thought that these monsters were really arrogant. She extended her hands to the sides, started looking up at the sky, opened her mouth and let out a loud roar. Upon hearing Little Nine's roar, the spiders finally realized that she was the insect mother, and without a second thought, all the little spiders began to flee. Seeing the spiders fleeing in disarray, Jiang was somewhat surprised and started wondering if the reason could be that these monsters were also insects. Little Nine approached Zhang, slightly turned her head towards him, and informed him that she had severed the connection between the boss and the little spiders. Jang did not expect that Little Nine's skills could be used in this way. Now that the monsters were disoriented, it was going to be much easier for him to defeat them. He extended the two daggers to the sides, and while staring at the boss with a murderous look, he praised Little Nine for doing a good job and decided that it was time to finish off the boss once and for all. Upon hearing this, Little Nine began to return to her original form. He started staring at the boss with a murderous look and replied with an understood master. While Zhang's body was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine, he gathered momentum, took a big leap and ordered her to follow closely. In the blink of an eye, using his daggers, he ended the lives of several monsters, cutting their bodies into pieces. He no longer had to worry about anything since without the boss's control, these monsters were in disarray. Jang began to move at a high speed towards the monsters and using his daggers, he started cutting their bodies into pieces. Now that the monsters were scattered and disorganized, they no longer posed a threat to him, so he didn't need to waste any more time. In a matter of seconds, Jiang finished off several monsters. Then he gathered momentum, took a big leap, and as he was advancing quickly towards the boss, he thought that now there was only one objective left. The boss opened its mouth and with a murderous look, it began to stare at Zhang and roar. Zhang decided not to back down and returned the gaze. He prepared himself to attack and thought that the boss was the one who could provide the highest devouring value. The boss tried to defend itself, but it was in vain. Just before it could make a move, Zhang descended upon it and swiftly attacked its head with both daggers, infecting it with Little Nine's poisonous mist in the process. Despite the difference in size within seconds, it lost its life and fell to the ground. Zhang landed on top of the boss's corpse. As he held both daggers in his hands, his body began to emit the venomous mist of Little. He stared fixedly at its lifeless body and decided that it was time to breed the swarm of insects. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Jiang began to stare at the girl with a serious look and started wondering what he should do with her. At that moment, his body started emitting Little Nine's poisonous mist, and several insects appeared behind him, staring at the girl, ready to attack. He approached her, started looking at the ground, and asked her to give him a good reason not to kill her. Upon seeing this, she panicked, quickly knelt before him, took out some gold coins, bowed her head before him, and explained that this was all the money she had on her. It was worth millions, practically her life. She was willing to give it to him in exchange for sparing her life. Zhang picked up a gold coin with his hand, started looking at the girl and thought that she had some sincerity. But since she knew too much and also lied, he decided that it was best to eliminate her. She stood up, closed her eyes, raised one hand towards the sky, and swore by her name Luo Sando that if she lied to him, then the heavens could punish her with 5 thunders. Zhang was somewhat confused as he didn't know whether to believe that her name was Luo Sando, since she always told lies without thinking about the consequences. Luo Sando approached him, handed him her identification card, and looked at him with a sincere gaze. She explained to him that what she was saying was true. She didn't know what her parents were thinking when they gave her this name, but she really wasn't deceiving him. She also added that if he still didn't believe her, then he could look at her identification card. Zhang took her identification card, brought it closer, and upon looking more closely, he saw a chubby girl. Upon seeing this, he asked Luo Sando if she was sure that she was the same person as in the photo. She grabbed strands of her hair, started pretending to have 2 ponytails, closed her eyes, puffed up her cheeks, and explained that the photo had been taken 2 years ago when she hadn't grown yet and hadn't lost weight. Upon seeing the expression on her face, Zhang turned his head back and started laughing out loud. Upon witnessing this, the insects flying behind him became somewhat confused. Then, he turned his head towards her and with an intense gaze, explained to her that he still couldn't trust her, and didn't know if she would be able to keep the secret since, after all, this was something only the dead could do. Just before he could finish his sentence, she jumped, used the storage ring, causing a portal to appear. While she had one hand in the portal, with the other she took out a scroll and started approaching Zhang. With a serious look, she asked him not to worry about this. Zhang began to look at the scroll with a surprised expression and asked her what it was. She began to open the scroll using both hands, and she explained to him that this was a sealing scroll. Once she revealed the secret, she would be executed immediately. She was very afraid of dying, and for this reason she had taken out the scroll. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform Zhang that she swore to protect his secret with her own life. If she revealed this secret, then she would be executed. Upon seeing this, he was somewhat surprised, as he couldn't believe that something like this existed in the world. Several seconds later, he picked up the scroll with his hand, closed one eye, started looking at it with the other, and decided to accept. Now that she had signed the confidentiality agreement, he decided not to kill her for now. Upon hearing this, he turned his head towards her and asked how much this scroll cost. She put her finger on her cheek, started looking at him, and revealed that its approximate value was around 10 million. Jiang tightly gripped the scroll, began to approach her, and with a furious look, he thought that this meant she had just used the only valuable thing she had in the storage ring. She thought she was going to die, so she started shaking her hands and told him that if he accompanied her home, then her parents would treat him well and give him even more rewards. Zhang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and explained that tomorrow morning he had to go to the night watch, so he couldn't waste any more time. After saying this, he wished her good luck. She stood up, and while she was watching him slowly move away, she caught his attention and asked him to take her home, since her house was much closer than the night watch headquarters. There was a teleportation station near her house, and she assured him that he would arrive on time. Although at first he refused, later he decided to listen to her, and several hours later they arrived at the Liu family mansion. This mansion was beautiful and very large, almost like a castle. At the same time, inside the mansion, there were a lot of hooded men prostrated before a woman who was sitting on her throne. A man approached her and informed her about what had happened to her daughter. Upon hearing this, she was shocked, as she didn't know how this could be possible. The Zhao family not only stole and killed, but they were also going too far with this lie. Seeing that she was furious, the man asked her to calm her anger towards him, as he was a wretched person who had caused her suffering. Several minutes later, Luo Sando entered the room, approached her mother, sat beside her, rested her head on her knees, and started crying. Her mother placed her hand on her head and then began to look at her subordinates with a furious gaze. She decided definitively to do something against the Zhao family. Her husband approached her, looked at her intently, extended his hands to the sides, and in a serious voice asked her to calm down, since the most important thing was that Luo Sando had returned safe and sound. He also added that the Zhao family was a powerful family in the country, and they couldn't mess with them being simple merchants. Jiang stayed silently observing and thought that her real name was Luo Sando. Her father turned his body towards Zhang, handed him a black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile thanked him for saving their daughter. He also asked him not to give rid of this black card. The mother turned her head towards him, closed her eyes, and with a pleasant smile told him that he was their benefactor. She had prepared a meal for him so that he could eat peacefully, and then leave using their teleportation, which was very fast. Zhang took the black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile told them that he wasn't going to eat, but at that moment his stomach started growling. He turned red, put his hand behind his head, and with a smile decided to eat a little. Upon seeing this, her father pointed out the place where the food was and decided to organize it immediately, while on the other side her mother put her hand near her face, closed her eyes, and began to smile. The best chefs in the Luo family prepared the food. In several minutes, Jiang ate several dishes until he stacked them one on top of another to form a column. One of the waiters who was bringing another dish approached him, and upon seeing this, he became somewhat confused and surprised at the same time. While Zhang had one hand resting on the table, and with the other was holding a piece of meat thigh, he thought that as the number of insects increased, his appetite also became greater. Beside him, Luo Sanda was sitting. She turned her head towards him and with a smile asked him not to rush and eat slowly. Next to her were seated her mother and father, who simply closed their eyes and with a joyful smile silently watched Zhang. Zhang started eating even more. She began to look at him and couldn't help but blush and be somewhat surprised. Her mother, who was enjoying a cup of tea, explained to her father that their daughter said Zhang belonged to the creation class and had divine rank. For her, he was very strange because she didn't know how he had been able to save their daughter from the hands of the Zhaoyao family. Her father put his hand under his chin, started looking at Zhang and explained to her that although their daughter didn't want to say it, he was sure that Zhang had hidden abilities and wasn't as useless as he seemed. He also added that he was handsome. Both began to look into each other's eyes, and with a smile, they thought that if he could help them fight against the Zhaoyao family and protect their daughter for her entire life, then he could be the perfect person. Her mother approached Zhang and with a pleasant smile asked him if he had a girlfriend. She also added that in their family, Sando also didn't have a boyfriend. Her hidden profession was also quite good. Besides being an expert in business, she could also be a financial manager. Her father stood behind him, gave him a thumbs up and explained Sando's body was also very sexy because she had measurements of 36, 24, 36. He also added that they made a perfect couple, and he had even thought of names for their future children. Zhang, who was drinking a glass of water, left it on the table, spit out the water and was shocked. Upon hearing her parents' proposal, she began to blush like a tomato and wonder what was happening. Without thinking for a second, Zhang ran out and thanked them for their hospitality. He left with the excuse that he was full and still had something urgent to do. Seeing this, her father asked him to wait a little longer as they wanted to talk to him. Sando approached her father, put her hand over his mouth and asked him to be quiet. Her mother turned her head towards her and started looking at her with a disappointed look. She sat on the chair. Her father approached her and said that their son-in-law had left. He also added that as his wife, she should go say goodbye to him. Her mother approached them and asked her not to worry since her father had the location of the black card. Wherever he went, they would follow him. Upon hearing this, she grabbed her knees with both hands, closed her eyes, and with a scream asked them to be quiet. She began to look down and started imagining Jing. She thought that although he was handsome and strong, he was also terrifying. And even though he was truly terrifying, there was no doubt that he was handsome and strong. At the same time, in the Jiu family, Jiu Wanchun, the head of the family, learned that his grandson Kunwu had died. Upon hearing this news, he couldn't help but become furious. With an angry look on his face, he ordered his subordinates to thoroughly investigate the murder. He didn't know who had done it and believed that Zhu Jianggu was responsible, so he ordered his other grandson to immediately send someone to investigate him. While a man was prostrated before him, another man named Zhu Baihang, who had one hand in his pants pocket, began to approach his grandfather. He extended his other hand to the side and explained that Kunwu was already over 20 years old and had only reached level 30 of the second transformation, so he was useless. After saying this, he asked him what was lamentable about the death of a useless person and told his grandfather that it wasn't worth getting so angry about it. Jiu Yuanchan, who was sitting in his chair with both hands resting on his knees, started looking at Jiu Baihang and told him that Kunwu was truly mediocre, nothing compared to him. Therefore, it wasn't a pity that he was dead. He also added that he was the grandson of him. Even to hit a dog, you had to look at who its owner was. He would like to know who in the country had enough courage to kill someone from the Jiu family. Upon hearing this, Jiu Baihang began to smile, extended his hand forward, and his hand started emitting an evil energy. He asked his grandfather not to worry about this trivial matter since after finishing the Tanjiao camp issue, it didn't matter who was guilty, he would take care of it in place of him. At the same time, Zhang went to the night watch office. He opened the door and entered where Jai Gang and several other people were. He turned his body to one side and was somewhat surprised to see that Zhang had arrived. He began walking towards them, putting his hand behind his head, introducing himself as Zhang Chen, the new member of the night watch. He couldn't help but wonder why there were so many people here. Zai Gang approached him, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, extended the other hand to the side, and with a smile told him that they had been waiting for him. Upon hearing this, Jiang was somewhat surprised. Jai Gang decided to introduce him to the new key members of their group. The first one was Yu Ziyu, a level 45 healer who was in the second stage. She used to be the youngest, but now he had taken away that position from her. Upon hearing this, she put her hand near her mouth, started looking at Jiang, and couldn't help but blush and think that he was very handsome. This was the first time she had worked with someone so good-looking. The second member was Duan Feng, a level 49 archer who was also in the second stage. He didn't talk much but was quite conceited. He put his hand on his hip, placed the other one near his forehead, and with a smile told him that he was delighted to meet him. The third member was Qiu Bailing, a level 49 warrior. Although his body was small, he was strong and a great talker. He approached Jiang, stood in front of him, closed his eyes, and with a smile explained to him that having a professional member of divine level was an achievement enough to boast about for a lifetime. The fourth member was a woman named Jane Tang, a master who was in the third stage. She was level 61 and belonged to the fire class. She was also a subcommander. She approached them, placed her hands on Qiu Bailing and Zhang's heads, began to caress them, and with a pleasant smile asked them to call her Aunt Tang in the future. She assured them that they would have meat to eat every day. With a pleasant smile, Jiang introduced himself as a humble awakened from the creation class. He asked how he could deserve so much enthusiasm from them. Deep down, he knew that even if it was clear, even if it was of divine level, the spiritual master's creation class was not well regarded by people. Ji Gang put one hand in his pocket, extended the other to the side, and told him that there was nothing wrong with being of the divine level spiritual master creation class. He asked him not to pay attention to idiots who had no good eye and only said nonsense. They all trusted him. Jane Tang put her hands on her hips, turned her head towards him, and with a smile told him that he was special because he had chosen to be one of them. The Night Watch. From now on, this would be his home. Ji Gang approached him, put his arm on his shoulder, and decided to talk about the main issue. He extended his hand to one side and with a serious look, explained that if he wanted to enroll in the training camp, he had to have a level higher than 20. He didn't know if Jiang was. With a calm look, Jiang revealed to him that now he was level 17. Upon hearing this, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised to see that he had changed job just 3 days ago and was already level 17. He grabbed Jiang by the shoulders, closed his eyes, started laughing out loud, and thought that he had not made a mistake in choosing him. He believed that Jiang truly had divine talent, and it wouldn't be difficult for him to advance 3 levels in 3 days. He decided to enroll him in the Tanjiao Genius Camp right away. Jai Gang opened his eyes, turned his head to the side, and saw everyone else staring at him with a serious expression. He put his hand in his pocket, turned his body towards Jiang, and with a serious look asked him if he had gotten into trouble with someone very dangerous in the last 3 days, as there was an unknown third-grade master investigating his whereabouts using their divine class. He turned his head to the side, started looking at the ground, and upon hearing that a third-grade master was investigating him, he couldn't help but wonder if it could be a member of the Zhao family. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, at the same time, a man arrived at an abandoned warehouse that was near where Jiang was and informed his leader that he had already returned. Upon seeing that he had come back, the leader asked him why he had taken so long and also gave him the order to quickly report on what was really happening in the spider's nest. This man was wearing a hood, had green hair, and was quite scared. He informed his leader that the spider's nest had been annihilated by someone mysterious and unknown, with a crushing annihilation that left not a single monster alive. His superior, who was a tall man with braids, couldn't believe what his ears had just heard. He turned his head towards his subordinate, and with a surprised look asked if this was some kind of joke. He couldn't believe that someone had completely annihilated the spider's nest. Another man who was by their side approached them, and upon hearing this, he was shocked. The man with green hair approached them, and with a serious look, he replied that this was true, adding that the city of monsters was in ruins. Upon hearing this, their leader put his hand on his chin, began to look towards the ground. He was unable to believe that the nest had been razed to ashes. This was too terrifying to hear. although at first he questioned if the culprit could be a member of the Night Watch. He later dismissed this idea as it was not the style of the Night Watch. He came to the conclusion that the responsible party must be some secret operation from a hidden family or a powerful assault group. He decided that it was best for them to retreat now. For them, this was a shame. They had been entrusted with the mission of filling a bottle with the venom of a wolf spider. Now that they had failed, he decided to make up for the losses on the way back by robbing some unfortunate ones. Upon hearing this, the man next to him turned his head towards him and couldn't help with sweat and panic. While they were talking, someone opened the door of the abandoned warehouse. Upon hearing the sound of the door opening, the three turned their heads back, and the man with green hair revealed to the other two that they had an unexpected visitor. Upon hearing this, they couldn't help but wonder who this person could be. The man put his hand on the door and as he slowly opened it, told them that he had finally found other professionals. Upon hearing this, the leader asked him who he was. This person was Jung. He entered the warehouse, started walking towards them, dropped an arm, extended his hand towards them, and with a calm look asked them not to worry since he had only come here to level up. He also added that he had come to exchange some food with them. Upon hearing this, their leader felt relieved as Jung had come alone. He turned his head towards him, started looking into his eyes and with a smile agreed to exchange some food with him, adding that food in the desert wasn't cheap. After saying this, he asked Jung what he wanted to exchange. The expression of the man next to him changed drastically. He adopted an offensive stance and began to stare at Jung. Jung approached the leader, started looking into his eyes and with a smile asked him not to worry, adding that he had some very good items to exchange. Upon hearing this, the man's expression changed drastically once again. He began to look at Jung and couldn't help but smile and feel curious about what he wanted to exchange. The leader ordered Jung to show him what objects he had. At that moment, the two men surrounded Jung and with a smile, they started unsheathing he simply turned his head slightly towards them and couldn't help but smile. From the beginning, he knew he couldn't trust them, so without thinking twice, he activated the ring and extended his hand towards them. In the blink of an eye, several spiders came out of the ring, and with a piercing gaze they started looking at the men. Jung turned his back on them, and with a mocking voice asked if his products were good. Upon seeing the spiders, the men sheathed their swords again, took a few steps back and went on high alert. The men began to look at the spiders and couldn't help but sweat and feel fear. They were aware that these were wolf spiders. They started to question if they had not been annihilated along with the spider nest. Thinking this, they began to wonder if Jung was the person who had killed all the spiders. The current level of Jung Chen was 17. He slightly turned his head towards them, started looking at them with an overwhelming gaze and with a smile, he asked them not to think that he didn't know what they wanted to do. After saying this, Jung sat on a rock, slightly turned his head towards them and calmly revealed that he was very angry now, so he advised them to grab their weapons and leave right away from here. Upon hearing this, the three men grabbed their belongings, turned their backs to Jung, started running, and apologized for bothering him, adding that they were leaving right away. Several minutes later, once the men had fled from the warehouse, Jung extended his hand to the side, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. He gave the order for the insects to come out. While Jung was sitting on the rock, with one arm resting on his knee, he reached up and used the poisonous mist to release two insects. They began flying around him, with a murderous look in their eyes, searching for any hidden threat. Jung began to drink a little bit of soup that the men had left. He was getting hungrier, and thought he should have known better when he first obtained Little Nine. He didn't expect leading the swarm of insects to have such side effects. When drinking the soup, a system window appeared and Jung's devouring value increased. Now he had 2768 points out of 1 million. The system advised him to increase the value as soon as possible. Originally, he had thought that the devouring value would increase faster after the insect swarm doubled, but he did not expect that the devouring value of the next reproduction would also double. This complicated things a lot for Jung, since now the devouring value that a boss could provide was just a drop in the bucket. Even if he eliminated all the beast nests outside the city, it wouldn't be enough to fill up the devouring value for the next reproduction. Jung started looking down at the ground and sank into his thoughts. He had heard that the beast nests and secret realms controlled by Nightwatch were not going to be made public, which meant that if he wanted to increase his swarm's devouring value, then he had to join the Nightwatch as soon as possible. He began to look at his hand and saw that little 9 had not yet woken up. Upon seeing this, he quickly came to the conclusion that the burden of reproduction was not small. At that moment, Jung started to feel someone's presence. Immediately, his expression changed drastically as he turned his head to one side and wondered what this person was doing here. He stood up, clenched his fist tightly, slightly turned his head to one side, and assumed an offensive stance. He could smell the scent of battle, and how there were a lot of people chasing after her. He didn't know what was happening here, and why she was being pursued. Several seconds later, a girl who was using an invisibility spell entered the warehouse, bumped into Jung, and fell to the ground. She was the same girl as before. She supported herself with one hand on the floor, and began touching her head with the other because it hurt. Jung turned his head towards her, and with a confused look, began to wonder why he had encountered her again. While the girl was lying on the ground, she placed one hand on the floor, put the other on her chest, lifted her head towards Jung, and immediately recognized him as the boy from the spider's nest. She started looking at him with a frightened gaze and asked him not to tell anyone that he had seen her here. Upon hearing this, Jung couldn't help but be shocked. He turned his head towards her and couldn't help but look at her with a surprised expression. She had been so close to him, and he hadn't even been able to sense her presence. It didn't take him long to come to the conclusion that the person the man with blue hair was chasing was her. He decided to take the girl somewhere safe, but at that moment he felt someone's presence. Quickly, he turned his head towards the warehouse entrance and with a serious look, he thought it was already too late to leave. Several seconds later, several people entered the warehouse. Among them were Jang Tae and the man with blue hair who was part of the Zio family. They began to walk towards Jung, and Jang Tae didn't take long to recognize him. He couldn't help but feel fear and chills. He pointed at Jung with his finger and informed his leader that he was the same guy they had encountered before. The man with blue hair put his hand in his pants pocket, started staring at Jung, and with a smile praised his subordinate for having a good sense of smell. Jung sat back down on the rock, rested his hands on his knees, and remained silent. Upon looking more closely, the man realized that this place was empty and Jung was actually camping alone. With a gaze filled with anger, Jang Tae began to look at Jung and asked him if a girl had entered the warehouse a moment ago. He ordered him to respond immediately, or else this time he was going to kill him. The man with blue hair started looking at Jung, put his hand in front of Jang Tae, and with a smile asked him to wait. He approached him, began to sit on the rock in front of Jung. He knew that he was from the spiritual master class. He noticed that Jung had leveled up very quickly. It had been less than a day since they last saw each other, and he was already level 16. The man became more and more interested in Jung. He decided to set this topic aside and explained that he now had something urgent to do. While he was sitting on the rock, Jung simply remained silent. He sat on the rock, rested an arm on his knee, drew his sword, began at Jung's neck, and with a serious look asked him if he had seen a girl with black hair around here. His subordinates approached, stood behind him, and remained silent. Jung simply remained calm, started looking into the man's eyes, and quickly concluded that based on the aura emanating from his body, his level was very high, surpassing level 30. Seeing that he could accurately detect his class and level, he thought this man must have some detection equipment with him. Jung turned his head to the side, began pointing towards the back door of the warehouse with his finger, and explained to the man that he had just seen someone's shadow going in that direction. He also added that because he wasn't of the perceptive class, he wasn't sure if that was the person they were looking for. Upon hearing this, the man started to stand up and tentatively decided to believe him. He also advised Jung to be more honest. Upon hearing this, Jung turned his head towards him and was somewhat surprised. He stood up, turned his back to Jung, slightly turned his head towards him, began to look into his eyes, and with a murderous gaze warned him that if he found out that he had helped that girl, then the Jo family wouldn't let him go. Upon hearing this, Jung Tai also turned his head slightly towards him and couldn't help but smile. Several seconds later, the man and his subordinates began to leave the warehouse. Jung turned his body towards them, and as he watched them gradually move away, he remembered that the Jo family was the most powerful family in Jiangguo. With a penetrating gaze, he started to look at the man with blue hair and thought that the clans in the city had a long history, and all of them were feudal officials. They were also extremely mysterious and rarely entered the world unless a great disaster occurred. Some powerful men in the family could even split the heavens and the earth. This guy was more powerful than Jung had thought. For him it wasn't good to be remembered by someone like that. Several seconds later, Jung slightly turned his head towards the warehouse exit, and seeing that the man had already left, he decided to leave as well since it wasn't good for him to stay in this place. The girl came out of her hiding place, approached Jung, put her hands on her hips and thanked him for saving her. Jung stood up, turned his body towards her and remained silent. He quickly grabbed her arm and upon seeing this, the girl panicked and started wondering what he had planned to do. Jung approached her, started looking into her eyes with an aggressive gaze and told her that she almost fooled him like last time. Since he had helped her again this time, he asked how she had gotten in trouble with these people. With Jung so close to her, she couldn't help but blush. She began looking at him and explained that her family had a huge debt. The guy planned to take away the things they were escorting and kill them all, but he didn't expect her to escape. He was afraid that the news would leak out, so he was chasing after her for this reason. After explaining this, she asked Jung if he wanted to silence her. Upon hearing this, Jung let go of her hand, turned his back on her, and began to walk away from her. Upon seeing this, she placed a hand on her chest, extended the other towards him and told him that she would always remember that he had helped her, and that she would also be very grateful to him in the future. While he was distancing himself from her, he closed his eyes, clenched his fists tightly and told her that he didn't want to get involved in her affairs. At that moment, Jung abruptly stopped, opened his eyes and thought that something was not right. The girl also noticed this and her expression changed drastically. With a fearful look, she revealed to him that someone had just placed a barrier spell around the warehouse. At that moment, someone who was outside the warehouse gave the order to their subordinates to come out. Jung started looking towards the entrance of the warehouse and thought that now it was impossible to escape. He knew that even if the girl said she didn't know him, they wouldn't believe her anymore. He activated his insect perception and began walking around the area, realizing they were surrounded on all sides. With a serious look, Jung began to stare towards the entrance of the warehouse, ready to face any opponent. On the other side, the girl got scared and placed her hand on her chest. Several seconds later, the man with blue hair and his subordinates appeared. Their bodies started emanating a killer aura. With a penetrating gaze, they began to look at Jung, ready to finish him off. He knew that Jung had lied to him. He approached him, stared into his eyes and ordered him to hand over the girl. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, he called Jiang a bastard and told him that he knew he had lied to him. He gave the order to his subordinates to catch the girl. With a serious look, Jiang simply started looking at him and remained silent. Upon seeing the man with blue hair, the girl's expression changed drastically. She began to look at him and couldn't help but panic and be terrified at the same time. She explained to Jiang that he had already taken everything that the Luo family owned. After saying this, she asked the man why he wanted to kill her so badly. He started looking at the girl and calmly asked if he really needed a reason. Upon hearing that she belonged to the Luo family, Jiang turned his head towards her and began to stare at her intently with a serious look. Jiang and the girl were on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, while the man with blue hair and his subordinates were on the first floor. She clenched her fist with one hand, extended the other to the side, started staring at the man and told him that if he killed her, then the Luo family would never forgive him. She also added that they would never let him live in peace. Jiang, who was standing behind her, simply dropped his arms to his sides and just kept watching the man. Upon hearing this, the man with blue hair couldn't help but burst into laughter. He asked her if she truly believed that a family like the Luo family was capable of doing this. At that moment, his subordinates began to look at the girl and couldn't help but smile. While he had one hand on his waist, he lowered his head, put the other hand over his face, and couldn't help but laugh at the thought that a second-rate family with a little money really took themselves seriously. He revealed to the girl that without the protection of the Zhao family ancestors 100 years ago, the Luo family would have been annihilated long ago. Upon hearing this, one of his subordinates unsheathed his sword and the others started laughing. Jiang Tai crossed his arms, stared at Zhang intently, and couldn't help but smile. After saying this, he removed his hand from his face, lifted his head, and with a serious look, he told her that in the eyes of the Zhao family, they were no different from humble peasants. He also added that for him, they were just cattle that the Zhao family could slaughter. Upon hearing this, Zhang turned his head towards him, and with a look filled with hatred, began to stare at him intently. He couldn't help but become enraged. He couldn't believe that a person could be so arrogant. The man extended his hand forward and his palm started emitting a powerful red energy which began to rise towards the sky. Then, he looked at the girl and with a smile asked her what could the Zhao family investigate if there was nothing to find. Several seconds later, the energy he had released began to create a powerful barrier around the abandoned warehouse. This ability was called the Dragon Prison Formation of the Zhao family. The girl looked up at the sky, placed a hand on her chest, clenched her fist, and couldn't help but be astonished and panic, as she now didn't know how she was going to escape from here. Zhang lifted his head and upon seeing the barrier, he couldn't help but be amazed. To him, the man with blue hair was someone very interesting. While Zhang and the girl were standing on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, Jiang Tai unsheathed his sword, started staring at the girl, and prepared to attack. He asked the others to listen carefully to the young master and not leave anyone alive. The others responded with an understood. The man with blue hair, who was standing next to Jiang Tai, simply remained silent. Several seconds later, Jiang Tai prepared to attack, but at that moment, the man with blue hair stood in front of him and put his hand up to indicate for him to stop. Then, he began staring at Zhang and with a smile told him that the girl from the Lu family must die today. He remained interested in Zhang as he was fully aware that he possessed the divine rank creation class. After saying this, while he was still looking at Zhang, he explained to Jiang Tai that the creation class called Spiritual Master was a very rare profession. He wasn't like other people who didn't know what it was. Then, he reached out his hand to the side and with a smile decided to give Jiang the opportunity to obtain everything under the sky today. He extended his hand towards Jiang and gave him the order to capture the girl, in exchange for sparing his life so that he could serve the Zhao family. After saying this, he asked Zhang what he thought. Upon hearing this, the girl who had her hands on her waist couldn't help but be shocked. On the other hand, Zhang dropped his arms to his sides and remained silent for several seconds. Zhang began to look down at the ground and couldn't help but smile and praise him. As the bastards of the Zhao family were really good at making, the girl turned her head towards him, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but panic, wondering if Zhang was really going to accept his proposal. With a murderous look, Zhang stared at the man with blue hair and rejected his offer, mocking him by telling him that the Zhao family could go to hell. After saying this, he tightly clenched his fists, and while his body was releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine, with a serious look he told him that he refused. He also asked him if he could come for him if he was looking for a fight. The girl turned her body towards Zhang, brought her hands close to her chest, and upon seeing that his body was surrounded by the poisonous mist, she couldn't help but take a few steps back and become terrified. She began to wonder what was happening. Upon hearing that Zhang had rejected his proposal, the man with blue hair couldn't help but become enraged as this was a dishonor to him. He gave the order to his subordinates to finish him off. Upon hearing the order, they unsheathed their swords, gained momentum, took a big leap and began advancing quickly towards Zhang. While in midair, Zhang Tai started looking at him and asked the others to be careful as Zhang wasn't easy. While little by little they were getting closer, Zhang simply stayed silently observing them without making any movement. Several seconds later, they approached the second floor and Zhang Tai, upon seeing that Jiang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, revealed to the others that he could use poison and advised them not to attack directly. Upon seeing that they were ready to attack, the girl hid behind Zhang. At that moment, Zhang deactivated the poisonous mist, extended his hand towards them, and while his body was surrounded by a green energy, he began to stare at Zhang Tai with a serious look and revealed to him that not only could he use poison but also the talent ability of his. Upon seeing this, the girl took several steps back, placed her hand on her chest, turned her head towards Zhang, and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused as she didn't know what this power was. In the blink of an eye, several green spiritual roots began to emerge from the ground. Zhang Tai approached Jiang, grabbed the sword with both hands and prepared to attack. But at that moment, he looked down at the ground and upon seeing the spiritual roots, he was shocked and couldn't help but wonder what this ability was. The spiritual roots grew enormous and in an instant, they entangled around Zhang Tai's and the others' bodies, rendering them immobile. They panicked as they didn't know what was happening. Zhang, who had his hand extended towards them, revealed that his ability was the evolution of all things. Little by little, the spiritual roots began to tighten Zhang Tai's body. He quickly grabbed the roots with his hands and started looking at Zhang, unable to help but wonder what was happening. Seeing how strong the roots were, he realized that his class was of divine rank. He was also confused because he remembered that Zhang could use poison as well. He decided not to stand idly by, unsheathed his sword, held it with both hands, and used all his strength to cut the roots around his body into pieces. Upon seeing this, the others also began doing the same as him. He advised them to attack the roots since they were very fragile. The spiritual roots began to fall to the ground near the man with blue hair, who started to push them away using his hands. He didn't take long to realize what was happening. With a surprised look, he shouted and called Zhang Tai an idiot, explaining that this was just a distraction. He also added that Zhang was ready to attack. Jiang took advantage of Zhang Tai and the others being distracted to release the insects, which began to look at them with a penetrating gaze. While his body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he reached out his hand to the side, stared at him intently, and explained that it was already too late. The girl sat on the floor, resting her hand on it, lifted her head, and upon seeing the insects, she was surprised. While Zhang Tai's subordinates were busy cutting the roots, the insects began to approach them. He turned his head to one side and upon seeing the insects, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but sweat and be shocked, wondering what these things were. The insects began to move at a high speed and started attacking them. Zhang Tai blocked the attack using his sword, but unfortunately for him, the insects were so strong that in a matter of seconds, they destroyed his sword. Upon seeing this, he was in shock, unable to believe that Zhang had actually destroyed his weapon. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it wasn't poisonous mist at all, but rather summoned monsters. At that moment, an insect began to approach him from behind, and it prepared to attack. He lifted his head, and upon seeing this he was surprised. He started screaming and revealed to the others that this poisonous mist actually came from the monsters. He came to the conclusion that he couldn't dodge the attack. Zhang, who had his hand extended towards him and was controlling the insect, began to look at him with a murderous gaze, and couldn't help but smile as he had finally caught him. Just before the insect could attack Zhang Tai, someone approached him and put their foot on his shoulder, called him trash, and asked him get lost. He turned his head to the side and upon seeing this, he became somewhat confused. Upon seeing this, Zhang also became somewhat confused and amazed at the same time. This person was none other than the man with blue hair. He unsheathed his sword, grabbed it with one hand, gained momentum, took a big leap, and as he slowly advanced towards Zhang, he used the first form of Kang Ning's 9 forms. By doing this, his body began to emit an orange aura. While Zhang's body was surrounded by little Nian's poisonous mist, he simply remained silent. The girl who was sitting on the ground next to him put her hand in front of her mouth and became terrified. Jiang lifted his head towards him, and upon seeing that he was faster than the poisonous mist, he couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly in sweat. He used the secret technique of the Zhao family called chasing dragons. At that moment, a dragon made of spiritual energy manifested itself and began to stare at Jiang. It clenched its teeth tightly and attacked him. Its attack was so powerful that it destroyed the area where Jiang was into pieces and created a smoke screen in the process. While with one hand he was holding the sword and had it extended towards Jiang, he began to stare at him fixedly and with a smile called him a bastard. He knew it was going to be difficult to deal with him. But luckily, his level wasn't very high and his speed wasn't fast enough. He thought that by using this blade alone he would be able to defeat him. But to his surprise, several seconds later, once the smoke cleared, his expression changed drastically. He was in shock as he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Luckily, Jiang was still alive thanks to the girl using her hidden profession ability called Earth Eternal Shield and creating a shield around them. While she had her hands extended towards the shield, it began to crack. She closed her eyes and while blood was coming out of her mouth, she explained to Jiang that she was in a lot of pain. Jiang, who was standing behind her, began to look at her with a surprised and dumbfounded expression. He realized that she was actually a defensive type. The man with blue hair had forgotten about her, but now seeing that she had blocked his attack using the shield, he couldn't help but become enraged. He started looking at her aggressively, clenched his teeth tightly, and prepared to attack again. Jiang began to look at him and thought that this was a good opportunity to attack. He extended his hand to one side, releasing the poisonous mist. Several seconds later, he landed on the ground. At that moment, several insects began to approach him quickly from behind. One of his subordinates, who was lying on the ground, reached out towards him and caught his attention to ask him to be careful. While holding the sword with one hand, he turned his head back and upon seeing the insects approaching quickly, he became alert. At that moment, he grabbed one of his subordinates by the hood. Upon seeing this, the subordinate became somewhat confused as he didn't know what was happening. While with one hand he was holding the sword, with the other he grabbed his subordinate by the hood and placed him in front of himself to use him as a shield. Since the insects were not very smart, they attacked his subordinate instead of him. The insects' attack was so powerful that their bodies were thrown backwards. His subordinate was seriously injured. While his body lay beside him, he placed a knee on the ground, leaned the sword against the ground, rested his arm on the other knee, and began to look down at the ground and cough. Jiang came down from the second floor, started approaching him and couldn't help but think that he was a nasty bastard for using one of his own men to block the attack. The insect's attack pierced the man's chest who was lying on the ground. Even though he was badly injured and bleeding from his mouth, he was still alive. He began to cough and caught his master's attention. He stood up, started approaching Jiang, slightly turned his head towards his subordinate, and thanked him for enduring the attack for him. He thought that he had not educated him in vain, and upon seeing that he was still alive, he couldn't help but praise him and think that he was truly strong. Jiang, who was standing in front of him, simply remained silent. He took out a dragon yuan pill from his pocket with his hand, opened his mouth and ate it. He couldn't believe that he was being forced to use the dragon yuan pill. In a matter of seconds, his subordinate lost his life. He began to approach Jiang, dragging the sword on the ground, causing small rocks to slowly float. Upon seeing this, Jiang assumed an offensive stance while on the other side. The girl sitting next to him and covering the wound on her arm with her hand remained still. He tightly gripped the sword, pointing it towards Jiang, and with a murderous look, he warned that his next attack would slice his head into pieces. Jiang simply remained calmly looking at the man in silence, ready to face any attack. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part.
Once the dragon yuan pill took effect, the elemental energy dragon grew enormous and appeared behind him. Its eyes began to shine, indicating to him that it was ready to attack. He assumed an offensive stance, stomped forcefully on the ground, breaking it into pieces. Then he tightly gripped his sword and stared fiercely at Jiang, determined this time to finish him off. His energy was so strong that the rocks around him began to float. Jiang started looking at the dragon and couldn't help but be terrified. He didn't know if he would be able to withstand the attack. The man with blue hair began unsheathing his sword and prepared to attack. This time he decided to use technique number 2 of the 9 Kongning styles. At that moment, he used the ability called the Descending Dragon's Cut and launched a powerful attack towards Jiang. In doing so, his body began to emit a powerful energy, and in the blink of an eye, the elemental energy dragon started advancing quickly towards him. It opened its mouth and prepared to finish him off. At that moment, the girl stood in front of. She extended her hands towards the attack and with a determined look, used the Earth Eternal Shield once again. Jiang put his elbow in front of his face, turned his head towards her, and upon seeing that despite being injured she was willing to block another attack, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. In an instant, a green shield appeared around them. Upon seeing this, the spiritual dragon began to attack the shield, breaking part of the ground and creating a curtain of smoke in the process. While she had her hands extended towards the shield and was blocking the attack, she closed her eyes, clenched her teeth tightly, and explained to Jiang that because the man had taken Zhao Yao family's secret dragon yuan pill, now the strength of the dragon had multiplied several times. Now her shield would not be able to withstand the attack at all, which meant they were doomed. In a matter of seconds, little by little the shield began to crack. Upon seeing this, she decided to use her last bit of strength to hold on as long as possible. Jiang grabbed his cloak with his finger, started looking at the spiritual dragon and couldn't help but be amazed and think that the man with blue hair was really strong since each strike from the dragon was a deadly move. The previous attack had already been astonishing, so he didn't expect him to unleash such power. The man with blue hair jumped, approached them, and began to stare at Jiang. When he saw that the shield was starting to crack, he couldn't help but smile. He used the Descending Dragon's Cut several times, launching powerful slashes towards the shield. Jiang returned his gaze and reached out his hand towards the sky, activating the swarm of insects mark. Seeing that he was a ruthless and powerful person, he decided not to show any mercy. Several seconds later, once the girl's shield broke, several thousand insects began to emerge from Jiang's hand and appeared in the sky. The man with blue hair looked up and upon seeing so many insects, he couldn't help but be shocked. He clenched his teeth tightly and started wondering what was happening. While thousands of insects were coming out of Jiang's hand, he began to stare at the man with blue hair and asked him to get ready. The girl who was sitting on the floor behind him put a hand on her shoulder where she had the wound, started looking at Jiang with a surprised look and began to wonder if he really belonged to the creation class. Several insects appeared around Jiang and began to look at the man with blue hair, ready to attack. Jiang started approaching him and gave the order for the insects to attack. Upon hearing this, he clenched his teeth tightly and couldn't help but panic. He knew that if so many insects attacked him at once, he wouldn't have any chance of winning. Upon hearing Jiang's order, the insects began to advance towards him and prepared to attack. Seeing the number of insects, he unsheathed his sword and assumed a defensive stance. With a serious look on his face, he started staring intently at Jiang and used the Descending Dragon Cut. By doing this, his sword emitted a powerful energy. He was not willing to give up as they were just some smelly insects. With little effort, he started cutting the insects into pieces, while Jiang's body was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine. With a penetrating look, he reached out his hand towards him and asked if he truly believed this. The bodies of the injured insects began to regenerate. Seeing that the insects could regenerate, he couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how this was possible. Several seconds later, they started advancing towards him and began attacking again. He began to defend himself from the attack using his sword. In the process, cutting the bodies of several insects in half, which quickly started to regenerate. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but panic as he couldn't believe that he truly couldn't kill them. While the insects were emerging from Jiang's body, with a serious look on his face, he began to stare at him intently and decided to see how long he could endure. The girl who was behind him turned her head towards him and with a surprised look, She couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how powerful he was. Upon hearing Jiang's mockery, he became furious, swinging the sword forcefully and using once again the skilled descending dragon cut, cutting the body of an insect that was in front of him in half. The spiritual dragon manifested again, opened its mouth and began devouring the insects. He had used this attack because the dragon could continue devouring the insects without allowing them to regenerate. While he had his guard down, one of the insects approached him from behind and gave him a strong bite on the arm, poisoning him and causing him to drop his sword in the process. Upon feeling the bite, he turned his head to the side and upon seeing the insect, clenched his teeth tightly and thought that this was not good at all. Now that his right hand was poisoned, he couldn't use the sword. Now that he had no other choice, he put his hand into his clothes and pulled out a red object. The insects took advantage of this opportunity and began to approach him quickly. But he took the object out of his clothes, raised it to the sky and used the technique called jade protection. At that moment, a powerful red energy started to appear around his body. He mocked Jiang by asking if he believed he could kill the great Zhao Yunwu with a few insignificant insects. Jiang simply stood there silently observing him without saying a word. He reached out his hand towards Yunwu, began to stare at him intently with a serious look and asked him what kind of treasure this was and how it had such power. After saying this, he ordered the insects to devour him. The object had created a shield around Yunwu's body. The insects followed Jiang's order and started attacking the shield, but no matter how hard they tried, it was in vain. Seeing this, he quickly realized that the attack hadn't even made a scratch on the shield. While Yunwu was covering the wound from the insect bite on his arm with his hand, he turned his head towards Jiang and advised him not to waste his energy since it was the inherited treasure of the Zhao family called Jade Treasure, which had divine powers. Jiang refused and ordered the insects to attack again. Yunwu stared at him and explained that once the Jade Treasure was activated, the shield could block all external attacks. With this shield, Jiang would not be able to harm him anymore. Jiang simply remained silent. While the insects continued to attack the shield, Yunwu began to approach them. Upon seeing that he was able to control the insects and bring him to the point of using the ancestral treasure, he couldn't help but praise him for being amazing. He also added that even if Jiang used all his cards up his sleeve, he wouldn't be able to harm him. Seeing the man approaching, the girl stood up and grabbed Jiang by his clothes. Within seconds, he started bleeding from his mouth and approached Jiang. With a smile, he decided to make him an offer one last time. As long as Jiang was willing to follow and obey him, he could allow him to join the Zhao family and grant him the Zhao surname, something many dreamed of achieving. After saying this, he asked Jiang to think it over carefully and not miss out on this opportunity. Jiang began to look at him with a calm gaze and remained silent, thinking for several seconds. He started to stare fixedly at Yunwu and couldn't help but get angry when he saw that he had become accustomed to being conceited, to the point where he couldn't even see the situation he was in. Upon hearing this, the girl turned her head towards him and with a confused look, began to wonder what Jiang was up to. He approached Jiang, extended his hand to the side and with a smile asked him to stop bragging. It didn't matter to him if Jiang accepted or not because even if he couldn't kill him today, he could do it any other day. With the influence of the Zhao family throughout the country, he wouldn't be able to hide or confront them. Jiang began to stare at Yunwu intently and with a smile, he reminded him of his own words that one couldn't investigate if there was nothing to find. After saying this, he asked him what could happen if he died without leaving any trace. At that moment, a giant tentacle struck the ground. Upon hearing this sound, Yunwu slightly turned his head back and with a gaze filled with terror, he started wondering what was happening. This tentacle belonged to the insect mother. She emerged from the swarm of insects and appeared behind them. Upon seeing how enormous she was, the girl fell to the ground. Yunwu looked up and upon seeing how huge and terrifying she was, he started sweating. At that moment, Jiang gave her the order to devour him. Upon hearing his command, Little Nine began to approach Yunwu and thank Jiang as she was very hungry. Upon hearing this, Yunwu's expression changed drastically. He started feeling a fear that he had never felt before in his life. Little Nine began to smile, and using her tentacle, she attacked Yunwoo's shield. Due to her enormous strength, his body was sent flying and crashed into the wall, breaking it into pieces. He started screaming in agony, unable to believe that a monster like Little Nine actually existed. He asked Jiang what kind of monster she was. With a calm look, Jiang explained to him that Little Nine had just finished reproducing herself, so he and the jade were exactly what she needed to satisfy her hunger. Little Nine began to repeatedly hit Yunwoo using her tentacle, creating a large curtain of smoke in the process. In a matter of seconds, the shield started breaking into pieces. He opened his mouth and started screaming in pain, questioning why the shield had broken so easily. He began to bleed from his mouth and fell to the ground. He couldn't believe that this was happening. Now the fate of the Xiaoyao family and the jade were going to disappear. Now that the shield had been broken, Little Nine started to stare at him intently. She began to bring her tentacle closer to him and decided to deliver the final blow. With a cold expression, Jiang remained silently observing this. Little Nine attacked Yunwoo, destroying the ground into pieces in the process. Her attack had been so powerful that all that was left of Yunwoo was a pool of blood. She began to lift the tentacle from the ground, and Jiang thought that no one should find out about this since Yunwoo was now dead. He started walking, reached his hand towards the sky, activated the swarm mark, and gave Little Nine the order to transform. Several seconds later, Little Nine transformed, returned to human form, and hugged him. Then, she closed her eyes and with a smile explained that Yunwoo was delicious. She thanked him and also added that she was the one who loved him the most. The girl who was sitting on the floor turned her head to the side, and upon seeing Little Nine, she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and scared. Jiang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and decided to take a look at the Xiao family. At that moment, he turned his head towards her and decided to take care of her. The girl who was sitting on the floor panicked and couldn't help but sweat. She remembered that she now knew his secret, and thinking about this, she couldn't help but wonder if he was going to kill her to keep her silent. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.